From the archives of the great library of Arathes, golden city of elves, the wise scholars of Grey Sage present the unlikely and highly questionable accounts from those who were avowed witness. These are the suspenseful investigations of the human, Fraenk Neversleep, Arch-Preceptor of Blackroot. And now, the Neversleep Scrolls, Circle of the Mind Thief, written by Philip Walton. The story continues. Chapter 18. It was well into the supper hour when they reached the Three Arrows, a tavern with decent food, strong drinks, and, most importantly, open seats. Leos urged that they continue all the way to the Sapphire Slash. But brothel food was notoriously substandard, and Fraenk was in no mood for that kind of atmosphere. Fortunately, there were plenty of ladies from the district in the Three Arrows enjoying food and ale, so his friend couldn't complain too much about being denied some kind of opportunity. It had taken them a while to finally arrive, and they were both ravenous. Fraenk had to first retrieve his preceptor's cloak and clothing from the bathhouse, then visit the healer to have his injuries seen to. Again. The nurse there instantly recognized him and gave Fraenk quite an earful as they reset cracked ribs, a swollen eye socket, and various other cuts and bruises. He was again ordered directly home to rest, which Fraenk swore to do as soon as he was able. Only then did they make their way to the tavern where they now sat at a table near the side wall, away from the untalented troubadour who was struggling at the lute. Neither man spoke much as they devoured 2 plates piled high with beef haunch roasted in butter with chunks of onions and saffin root. Leos accompanied his supper with 3 foamy pints of a dark Istin brown beer. Wanting to keep his wits, Fraenk kept himself to only 1 and drank it slowly. When they had finished, Fraenk leaned back in his chair, his belly starting to protest uncomfortably from the rich food. Leos waved the barmaid over to refill their tankards. "That's all for me," Fraenk said, pulling his cup back from the robust woman with a red cluster of prominent sores at the corner of her mouth. She topped Leos's tankard off and gave him a wink before waddling away into the crowd. "I saw her first, you dog," he said, and took a long drink. "She's all yours, my friend," Fraenk said and burped. The pain in his belly abated some. Leos Muninger curled his lip and unleashed a belch that sounded much like an unhappy Shivan getting his tail stepped on. It was answered by 2 others, like it from different spots in the tavern. "I like this place, Fraenk." Leos laughed and gulped down more beer. After another hour, the lutist took mercy on all of them and packed up his instrument for the night. Fraenk noticed they had stayed long enough for the tavern to empty out, and was starting to fidget. He had much to do. But it would be very bad form to twice abandon the man who saved his life. Fraenk had to wait until his friend felt justly rewarded. If that meant buying the last pitcher of beer in this place, then that's what must be done. Leos's smile faded, and he got a distant look. "I'm worried about you, Fraenk." "Is that why you were following me?" Fraenk asked. "I wasn't," Leos smiled again broadly. "Ah, very well. Our second meeting wasn't as accidental as it appeared." "I didn't think so." "So?" Leos said with a drunk smile. "What do you think?" "What do I think about what?" "Me being a preceptor. I showed you that I proved myself." Fraenk arched an eyebrow. This conversation just took an uncomfortable turn. His friend seemed to be waiting to spring this moment on him for a while. Now his courage floated on a river of beer. "I'm smart and I can fight. I know the district good as you." "I can help you, Fraenk," Leos said. "And gods know you need it too. Every time we meet, someone's trying to kill you. I'm around many different people while someone's trying to kill me. It's a dangerous job." "Well, I can help. You know me." Fraenk could still feel the swelling around his eye and knew that his friend was right. About all of it. He was a mess and he did need every man he could get. But something stopped Fraenk. He couldn't take Leos Muninger into his service now, and maybe not ever. His friend read Frank's hesitation and darkened. "I know we have a past, Fraenk," Leos said. "What do you mean? We're friends." "We've known each other since we was kids, but we wasn't always friends." Leos sighed heavily, then looked up. "You called me Mudge today." "I did?" Fraenk asked. "Must have been from getting hit in the head a few dozen times." "Look, I know you didn't mean nothing by it, but you said it. You still don't trust me." There it was, Fraenk realized. That was the reason. There had been too much history. Too many beatings as a kid. Too many exhausted days running down the street from the gang. Too many nights spent scared that they would find him while he slept. This man was, and maybe always would be, his bully, and the bully of every street kid he knew growing up. But hadn't Fraenk forgiven him yet? They had made peace at some point as adults. It wasn't some mushy child's fable like they preached in the cathedrals either. How foolish to believe in some profound moment of repentance and forgiveness, wrongdoer reformed in a shaft of holy light. No. Instead, they both grew up and found jobs, tipped back a few tankards in the off hours, and became actual friends. And nothing bad from their childhood was supposed to matter anymore, so they didn't ever talk about it. And even though Fraenk decided he would forget the past, he realized he still carried it. That weight, the history, it was all still there, buried down and festering right back up. "Leos, I'm sorry," Fraenk said. "I've just got too much happening right now to take you on. I've already got an apprentice as well. When things calm down a bit—" "I saved your life twice," Leos snapped. Several startled patrons looked over, then quickly away. "You think a few drinks is going to cover that?" "And I'm grateful, Leos. I am. I owe you something for all you've done, but I can't make you a preceptor. I have to do what's best for Lady Blackroot. Everything I do is in service of the family. There's a process—" "Black blood of Xanod!" Leos cut him off. Fraenk could see the glossy shine to his friend's eyes. He was very drunk, but that didn't mean he was lying. Probably the opposite. Leos began to tear up then. Fat dribbles spilled down his cheeks onto the craggy wood tabletop. His gaze went up like he was looking at something far away, not just distant in miles, but years as well. "You don't understand. I need this, Fraenk," Leos began softly. He took a shuddering breath. "I was there on the field that day with the army. It wasn't a miracle. It was death writ large. And we were all guilty and deserving of that fiery sword. The winged man's gaze showed us that. Saw into our souls, our deeds. It burned us too. We only survived because of which side we were standing on. That's it. And you want to know the worst part? The part that won't leave my head." "What?" Frank's voice was barely a murmur. "I saw the black door open for me, Fraenk. They were calling my name. They said I'm coming there soon. Hell was readying a spot just for me." Fraenk sat in stunned silence. "I know I can't atone for all of it, Fraenk. The other kids we run with is dead. Got sick, or hanged for stealing, or the wrong end of a knife. But you're the last alive. Maybe the ones above will forgive me if I make it right with you." "Hey, it's all right." Fraenk tried to reassure his sobbing friend. He knew he should forgive Leos right there, but something small and dark and hard inside him wouldn't let him. So he let old Mudge spill out his remorse for the sins of the past. After his friend had calmed some, Fraenk paid for the meals and the drinks, then secured Leos a room in the upstairs of the tavern. Curious patrons watched him maneuver his large, drunk friend up the staircase and into a small room with a stale, musty mattress. "I won't be there next time to save you," Leos said darkly as Fraenk pulled his boots off. "You don't have to. Maybe I don't deserve it," Fraenk replied and draped an old blanket over him. Leos was snoring loudly by the time Fraenk closed the door behind him and left. It was dark when Fraenk left the Three Arrows. The healer's medicine and good meal had done wonders, chasing many of his body's complaints away. Well, he could walk, at least, and his head was much clearer, which was good because he needed to think, and he didn't have much time. The torches and braziers had been lit along the high street, casting warm, flickering light for the travellers and patrons still out on business after sunset. Frank's first instinct was to get back to Blackroot Estate as quickly as possible. Gwen needed to know about the kidnapped preceptors, and he also needed to stash the cursed necklace away in his room until he could really have a chance to figure it out. It would take too much valuable time to go all the way back up, however. To pass along the message, Fraenk opted for the next best thing, or possibly the worst. In a nearby alley, Fraenk used some dried fish to coax out one of his many conditioned scrates. It would be a gross exaggeration to call them trained. He scribbled off a coded message, loaded it into the pouch on the lizard cat's neck, and gave it a whiff of a small square of fabric that carried Gwen's scent. Fraenk wondered if the scrate could still find her if she was wearing a glamour, but the animal was already scrambling away. Too late to do anything about it now. Frank's message about the missing preceptors could be entrusted to a semi-feral, bite-happy feline reptile, but his magical necklace that could peer into minds, however, could not. Had he imagined seeing the thoughts of Arch-Preceptor Gingerglade? Fraenk wondered. He had taken quite a few punches to the head. Perhaps his addled brain had made it up. That had to be the reason, but no, that wasn't it. Fraenk was clear-headed when it happened. He heard Farathiel's voice. He was calling someone a thief. He saw Lord Fernbrook throwing a tantrum over his missing kobold, and his own missing preceptors who were apparently kidnapped and soon dead if he didn't move quickly. The pendant had shown him all of that. "What are you?" Fraenk pulled the necklace out to examine it in his palm. The dull stone looked flatter than ever. He could feel its magic wanting him to lose interest in it, but Fraenk was more intrigued than ever. How does it actually work? Fraenk had somehow triggered it accidentally when he was talking to the Arch-Preceptor, but could he do it again? The streets had mostly quieted at this late hour, but maybe there was someone he could try it on. The ethics of using an untested magical item on an unsuspecting individual was dubious at best. Fortunately for Fraenk, his job duties allowed him to waver any moral quandary in the name of district security. He tried not to abuse this privilege, and additional recompense, Lady Blackroot would make good faith offering at the temples for any serious violations Fraenk perpetrated in the name of the family. Now to find someone whose mind he could gaze into. To his right, a tavern door banged open and a soused group of mismatched travellers stumbled out. They looked to be in the midst of some quest, or perhaps they'd completed it, given their celebratory mood. Fraenk clutched the pendant and moved closer. Then the large, burly man with fur-lined armour doubled over and vomited on the stones. Giant Nauseous drunk? No, Fraenk said to himself. A man with stringy brown hair stood with his back to Fraenk on the street further down. He seemed all right. Fraenk crept closer, gripping the pendant. "Hell's fire! 2 cats in a pot. My teeth know when it's raining," the man screamed aloud and twitched. "A big nay to that one as well." Fraenk pivoted quickly across the street. As he got to the corner that led to the docks, Fraenk saw a scrum of the shaved-headed hayseeds in their dark, rough-spun frocks. They were clustered around their elderman, a fat, bearded blowhard with tattoos printed across his scalp. "Turn from your wickedness, city of devils! We will call forth the Under One to cleanse this place. The blood star will be the sign. Lament and wail!" He boomed, voice carrying like thunder down the street. The other members surrounding him youped and gibbered in ecstatic agreement. Here was Nim's supposed Palewood brethren, Fraenk guessed. For being a dangerous cult of self-mutilating demon summoners, it sure looked like they had fallen on hard times. They were all stringy and sunken-eyed, with the exception of their leader. Fraenk guessed the big man kept his flock in thrall with religious fervour, so he could live the good life. In any case, Fraenk wanted no part of any of their minds. He made a mental note to have them run out of town at the earliest opportunity. This was not going well. Perhaps it was time to move on. Then he spied the perfect candidate ahead. An old woman was in the process of taking down her fruit stand that she operated every day from that location for many years. Fraenk had purchased many a ripe, crisp apple from her that always seemed free of worms. Elise her name was, or Elsie, Fraenk couldn't recall exactly. She had just picked up a woven bushel basket half full of the apples which didn't sell that day. Elsie recognised Fraenk immediately as he approached and smiled. "Good evenstar to you, Arch Neversleep," she said cheerfully in her old craggy voice. Fraenk stopped in front of her, holding the pendant loosely. She looked at him, an expectant curiosity on her wrinkled face. He would certainly find nothing terrible in this woman's thoughts. Perhaps a mild annoyance for appleworms, or a kind prayer for her beloved grandchildren. Fraenk clenched his teeth and took a breath, fingers ready to close around the necklace. He needed to test the pendant. There was no better opportunity. "Would you like an apple?" she asked sweetly. Fraenk stopped. "Oh, please, Arch Neversleep, you'd be doing me a favour. lightened this old woman's burden by just a bit. She set the basket back on the ground and selected the nicest fruit she could find. He slowly withdrew the necklace into his palm, a tight smile on his lips. Fraenk took a large, crunchy bite from the apple that Elsie, or was it Elise, had given him. His attempt to try out the cursed pendant was a bust, but ethical carte blanche aside, he couldn't bring himself to use it on that sweet old lady. He took another chomp, sugary juice spraying as he stomped down the street. The first lawless goon he encountered, Fraenk vowed to burn a hole in his brain with that necklace. He slipped it back into an inner pouch. He had to move on to the other pressing matters. What Fraenk needed to do was recover his missing men, and to do that he needed the full strength of his preceptor service. Unfortunately, this made it rather inconvenient, since 3 of them were the same ones being held hostage. Fraenk finished his apple and lobbed the core over the fence into the lower market bazaar as he passed it. "What am I supposed to do? Go snare this kobold and deliver him to the Fernbrooks myself?" he growled to the air. But that was exactly the answer. He had no other good options. He had to find the kobold. If the Fernbrooks went through the reckless trouble to capture 3 of Frank's preceptors, they must really want the filthy scamp. Perhaps Fraenk could work out some scheme with him to rescue his men and keep the creature out of the Fernbrooks' hands, assuming the dim little toe-chewer wasn't a complete pickle like the majority of his ilk. What was his name? Potsoup? Potu? Posuyu? Posur Faljaon. That was it. That was the name Farathiel had said before all his rotten thoughts dumped into Frank's head. The name sounded familiar somehow. Hopefully the thick-headed kobolds would recognize it and give him some good information as to the little guy's whereabouts. Fraenk grimaced at just the thought of trying to explain himself to a clan of greedy, bunk-eyed trough-mouths. As Fraenk was figuring out what to do next, the clatter of horseshoes turned his attention. Someone was riding up fast. "If one more person tries to kill me today, I swear to Grom," Fraenk grumbled, then was actually relieved to see the rider was Nim Stonebridge. Nim reined up the horse awkwardly and nearly fell from the saddle, getting off. "Fraenk, thank mercy I found you. Someone says they saw you walking this way," Nim said, and then when he saw Frank's bemused expression. "What? I'm not used to those things." "And where have you been?" Fraenk asked. "Tracking down the other murders like you asked me," Nim replied defensively. And Fraenk recalled the mission he had sent the junior preceptor on. He had a suspicion from what the beautiful Lindblood woman had said that Mycon wasn't the only one killed that night. "Right, sorry, Nim. Other murders? What did you find out?" It took me a while on account that the partisans were not exactly talkative with someone who's run afoul of them in the ancient past." Nim scratched his head sheepishly. "I had to promise the arch-preceptor of Blackroot would owe a few favours to get some answers." "Oh, did you now?" Fraenk looked nonplussed. An owed favour to a partisan could get costly. "What did my generosity buy me, then?" "Well, there was 3 murders that night which stood out. All of them were tortured first," Nim said, checking the notes on his jotter. Fraenk perked up. "That's the work of our maniac elf, all right. Who were they?" 2 brothers, twins, Eric and Derek Thorbin. They worked in a tannery. One of them got it real bad, took a long time to die. The other just got a blade to the throat. So not just torture, he wanted information. Fraenk reasoned aloud. Once he got it, what about the last one? Arica Broadwaters. She was a theatre district studbroker. "I know her," Fraenk said. "Rumour was she got her ears sharpened so she'd pass for half-elf." "Studs weren't all she brokered, apparently," Nim continued. "The partisan I talked to said she had a secret compartment under the floorboards, but it was all opened when they found her body. Had one of those forbidden paintings and some kind of Gazeon magic fertility talisman. The poor sap who picked it up ran straight home and put a set of triplets in his wife's belly that night." Nim started to laugh, but corrected himself when he saw Frank's grim expression. "That's some pricey wares to just leave behind. The elf was looking for something specific," Fraenk said. "He was willing to torture and kill to get it." "This was worse than torture, sir. She held out for a long time, watching her boys bleeding on the stones. Then apparently he plucks the right eye clean out of her head and sets it out for her to look at with the t'other un," Nim added. This was pure evil. A long silence followed. The melody from a children's dead song began to play in Frank's mind. Kids sang it to one another at night to elicit chills, a summons for the recently dead to come back for one more to join them. The broker, the brothers, the baker, Fraenk intoned eerily like the most gruesome bedtime poem, went to meet the maker. "Stop that, Fraenk," Nim said nervously. "I don't like it. With worms in teeth and worms in head. Please, stop it. Give me what I want, or you'll be—" Fraenk trailed off. And then Fraenk knew what Bas Greenbriar was after. The necklace, the one he now had in his pocket. But why was it so valuable? As far as Fraenk could tell, it was a cantrip at best, a silly trick, something a wealthy elf lord would gift a spoiled daughter who would then use it twice before abandoning it in one of her many overstuffed jewellery boxes. Certainly not worth dying for, let alone holding out from torture. And why were these victims a part of all this? What was the connection between them? It didn't make sense. "What now, sir?" Nim asked, seeing Frank's intense expression. "Do you still have kin in Rounderville?" "Well, yeah, but—" Nim suddenly realised what Fraenk was asking. No, Fraenk, we can't go down there. I'm not one of them no more. They certainly don't like you." "That's why you're coming with me," Fraenk said. "You're going to make sure no one bothers me while I find a kobold. We leave now." Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another exciting episode. And remember, the learned scholars of Greysage caution you that the veracity of these events remains unproven. Now go safe in the light of the powers, until our hands clasp again.